Hello, my name is Marta Caulfield, and I'm the Director of the Legal, Legislative, and Record Services Department, as well as the Returning Officer for the City of St. Albert's 2025 municipal election. The information provided today is regarding third-party advertising in the municipal election context and is current to May 1st, 2025. It is not legal advice and is provided for information only. Today we'll be covering the topics you see on screen here. Our goal is to provide everyone with a solid overview of the legislated requirements surrounding third-party advertisers. If you do need further interpretation, please seek independent legal advice. The information provided today in this presentation is a summary of Part 8 of the third-party advertising provisions of the Local Authorities Election Act. On the agenda today, we'll talk about what third-party advertising is and who is eligible to be a third-party advertiser. Next, we'll chat about the relation between candidates and advertisers, and we'll move into advertising requirements and registrations of advertisers. Finally, we'll end off with advertiser finances. What is third-party advertising? Third-party advertising is a way for others outside a candidate campaign to express support or opposition for candidates, or to take a position on an issue that is the subject of a vote on a bylaw or a question, with the intent to incur expenses or contributions of $1,000 during the advertising period. It does not include candidates and is separate from any candidate's campaign. More information related to candidate expenses will be provided during an upcoming webinar. The Local Authorities Election Act also includes an advertising period, which is May 1st of the election year until the end of the day on election day, which this year will be Monday, October 20th. This is the period during which a third-party advertiser may register and in which they may carry out election advertising activities. The Local Authorities Election Act includes rules governing the finances and accountability of third parties that intend to engage in election advertising and must register with the City of St. Albert or the Provincial Registrar as applicable. Now that we've covered the basics of what third-party election advertising is, we're moving on to which parties are eligible or ineligible to register as third-party advertisers. The following entities are eligible to be third-party advertisers: individuals that reside in Alberta, corporations that carry out business in Alberta, Alberta trade unions or employee organizations, or groups of which all members reside in Alberta. This is an unincorporated group of individuals or corporations acting in consort for common purpose, and the group may include trade union, an employee organization, or any combination of individuals, corporations, trade unions, or employee organizations. The following parties are ineligible to register as third-party advertisers: individuals who do not reside in Alberta, candidates, corporations that do not carry out business in Alberta, trade unions or employee organizations that are not in Alberta, a group where any member of the group is ineligible, registered charities, and prohibited organizations, which includes municipalities, municipally controlled corporations, nonprofit organizations, provincial corporations, Métis settlements, boards of trustees, public post-secondary institutions, corporations that do not carry on business in Alberta, registered parties as defined by the Canada Elections Act, and organizations designated by the Lieutenant Governor and Council. This is a lot of information, and it is recommended that you become very familiar with Part 8 of the Local Authorities Election Act in order to familiarize yourself with who is eligible and ineligible to be a third-party advertiser. It is important to note that the Local Authorities Election Act strictly prohibits coordination or collusion between a third-party advertiser and a candidate for the purposes of circumventing contribution limits. If you are unsure if your advertising and fundraising activities would be in contravention of the Act, it is imperative that you seek independent legal advice to navigate this. Next, I want to talk about what third-party advertising is and what is not considered third-party advertising under the Local Authorities Election Act. Third-party advertising can include paid social media posts, such as those on Facebook, X, or Instagram, TV, radio, and newspaper ads, traditional election signs, billboards and posters, newsletters, brochures, and mailing inserts. The possibilities are quite broad. It also includes events or canvassing which are held to support any candidate or to oppose any candidate. Some things that are not third-party advertising would include editorials, debates, interviews, columns, and letters. It would also not include any communication by a corporation to employees or shareholders, phone calls encouraging residents to vote, and any unintended transmissions of ads to other jurisdictions. This means that if an Edmonton advertiser's radio ad is broadcast and can be heard in the city of St. Albert, it would not count as an advertising message. Additionally, sharing political views on the internet, on blogs, or on paid social media posts is not considered third-party advertising. Regarding identification of third-party advertisers, the Act includes identification requirements for the advertisements. Third-party advertisers must identify that the ads have been authorized by them and must include their name and contact information, and requirements of how this information is to be presented varies across different mediums. For print or digital media, the identification would be included on the message itself. An example would be a standard static ad, such as an election sign or a newspaper ad. In this example, the static ad itself would contain the advertiser's name, that they authorized the ad, and their contact information. For telephone advertising, whether in the form of a pre-recorded message or a live message, the telephone number of the advertiser must be capable of appearing on the call display and must not be disabled. The name of the advertiser must also be stated at the beginning of the message, and the message must state that it has been authorized by the advertiser. Finally, at the end of the message, the third-party advertiser's phone number must be provided. For broadcasts and electronic media, such as YouTube, the third-party advertiser must identify themselves at the start of the ad, must state that the message has been authorized by them, and provide their contact information. Next, we'll move on to the requirements for registration of advertisers. Just like with candidates, advertisers must also file with the local jurisdiction pursuant to the Local Authorities Election Act. However, prior to registration, there are some actions which must be undertaken. The advertiser must ensure a Chief Financial Officer, also known as CFO, has been appointed and that an advertising account has been opened at a financial institution. This information is required on the registration form, otherwise known as Form 27. You can find the form on our election page under the Third-Party Advertisers tab. The completed registration form, Form 27, can be emailed to election@stalbert.ca or dropped off or mailed or couriered to the election office on the 3rd floor of City Hall. Form 27 and details of how to file with the City of St. Albert are on the city's election website. Finally, if there are any changes to any details on the registration of a third-party form, such as a change to the CFO or the financial institution, please notify us in writing within 30 days of the change to update your registration. When does a third party need to register with the local jurisdiction? The advertiser must register when it has or plans to incur expenses of at least $1,000 related to election advertising, or when it has or plans to accept contributions of $1,000 or more during the advertising period. In the course of elections, residents and organizations may participate in small-scale election advertisements as they do without having to register with the city. The legislation instead seeks to regulate larger-scale advertising activities. If a third-party advertiser is registered in more than 10 local jurisdictions, the third party may apply to the provincial registrar for registration. When a third party is registered with the provincial registrar, the registration of that third party with any local jurisdiction is deemed to be cancelled. Moving on to finances. This section will cover both the legislative requirements around accepting contributions as well as financial reports at the end of the advertising period. First, I will start with contributions. A contribution is any contribution made to an advertiser that is money or a gift in kind. It is important to note that this does not include volunteer services, such as volunteers who may support an advertiser in hosting events or carrying out canvassing activities. I would like to take a moment to briefly cover two items in the Act. The first is fundraising functions. A fundraising function is any social function held for the purpose of raising funds for the advertiser. There are specific requirements on how funds raised are calculated as contributions. Therefore, please review the Act carefully if this is an option you would like to pursue. The second is loans. An advertiser may borrow funds from a financial institution for the purpose of financing their advertising campaign. It is important to keep in mind that the repayment of the loan is subject to the contribution requirements of the Local Authorities Election Act. This means that payments on the loan by the advertiser or by an eligible contributor are considered campaign contributions under the Act. Eligible contributors are the same parties who are eligible to register as a third-party advertiser. To recap, this could be any Alberta resident, Alberta corporation, or group who is not a candidate and who is not a prohibited organization. There are some small nuances to contributions from groups and organizations around attributing the contribution to the group or to the members of the group. For the contribution to be attributed to the members of the group, the amounts paid by the individual members must have been paid voluntarily with the understanding that they were making advertising contributions. Their names and amounts contributed are provided to the advertiser to be recorded. For contributions that are not attributed to the group's members, the organization provides a contribution from the organization's own general funds, and the contribution is attributed to the organization itself. Contributions may not exceed $5,000 per contributor. Advertisers may also accept contributions from eligible contributors as long as they only accept no more than the maximum allowed under the Act from each separate contributor. Like candidates, advertisers may choose to raise funds, self-fund, or both. Once the third-party advertiser registers with the city, they may continue to accept contributions if they have already been doing so, over and above the $1,000 pre-registration limit, and they may incur expenses of more than $1,000 if they had already started doing so. It is important to clarify that the way the legislation is worded, an advertiser may accept contributions prior to registration just as long as they don't exceed $1,000 in monetary or in-kind contributions. Advertisers must also issue a receipt in the form acceptable to the city to each contributor. The city has not developed a specific form for advertisers to use. However, whatever form the advertiser uses must contain the following information: the date of the contribution, the name of the contributor, the address of the contributor, and the amount contributed. When third-party advertisers hold meetings for the conduct of their own business, for example, if they're holding an AGM, members may make contributions to the group for the purpose of election advertising. Where a person contributes less than $50, the aggregate of all amounts donated that were less than $50 can remain anonymous, and the lump sum is recorded as a contribution. Where any amounts over $50 are contributed, the individual contributions must be recorded separately. Any anonymous contributions over $50 from any source may not be used, and the advertiser must endeavor to establish the identity of the contributor if they wish to be able to use that contribution. If the identity cannot be established, then the contribution is paid to the local jurisdiction. It is also prohibited for advertisers to accept contributions from donors to whom the contribution does not belong. A brief note now on advertising expenses. Pursuant to the Local Authorities Election Act, all advertising-related expenditures and contributions must be approved by the CFO. At the end of the election period, the advertiser must submit financial reports to the local jurisdiction detailing expenses, so it is important that the advertiser retains good records on their expenses. More on that in the next couple of slides. After the election is over and the advertising period has ended, there are a few things that third-party advertisers must do. Just like candidates, advertisers must submit financial documentation to the local jurisdiction by March 1st, 2026 in the required form. Please note that this date may change if the legislation is amended by the province, so please check the Act regularly to ensure that all deadlines are complied with. The first part of the documentation is a disclosure of contributions. The document must set out the total amount of all advertising contributions received during the election advertising period, which were under $250, and for each contributor who made advertising contributions during the election advertising period totaling more than $250, the report must set out the total amount contributed, the name, address, and date of contribution for each advertising contribution. The form is available on the city's website. The next document which is required is the election advertising return. This return details the expenses, the advertisements which the expenses relate to, the contributions received, and any other supporting documentation for the advertising activities of the third-party advertiser. The advertising return is prepared by the third-party advertiser's CFO and is due by March 1st, 2026, which is the same date as the third-party advertising contribution statement. You'll notice that some of the requirements of the return may contain redundancies between this form and the contribution statement. For example, the listing of contributions. If there were no election advertising expenses incurred, it must be indicated so in the return. Advertisers should maintain accurate records of contributions, including receipts issued to contributors, and must retain original receipts of expenses, as these may be requested when the advertiser files their final reports on or before March 1st, 2026. Let's do a quick recap and compare the advertising contribution statement and the advertising return side by side, as it is foreseeable that there could be some confusion between these two. The purpose of the advertising contribution statement, which is Form 28, is to disclose contributions under $250 and to disclose the names of those who contributed over $250, as well as the totals for both. The purpose of the advertising return, on the other hand, is to show the financial activities of the registered third-party advertiser related to their advertising activities, such as which advertisements they paid for and how much they cost. We are just finishing up, and I would like to take a moment to review the responsibilities of third-party advertisers that we have covered today. The first is timely registration. Advertisers must register with the local jurisdiction once they've received or spent $1,000 on advertising activities, or once they intend to accept or spend $1,000 on advertising activities. You can find the forms on our website. The second is identification of the third-party advertiser. Advertisers must ensure that their advertisements comply with the identification requirements of the Local Authorities Election Act, in that they clearly identify the advertiser, identify that the advertisement has been approved by the advertiser, and also how to contact the advertiser. Third, the third-party advertiser must ensure they comply with the contribution requirements, in that they accept contributions from eligible contributors only, that they provide receipts where they were required to do so, and that contributions are recorded when required to be recorded. Finally, advertisers must ensure that they file the correct financial documents, one being the advertising contribution statement, found on Form 28, which details out contributors, and the advertising return, which details out income, expenses, and advertisements. To reiterate, the information provided today does not constitute legal advice. It is the third-party advertiser's responsibility to ensure they meet all legislative requirements and deadlines. It is suggested that anyone interested in becoming a third-party advertiser review Part 8 of the Local Authorities Election Act, view the Municipal Affairs website for information, and seek independent legal advice if necessary. The next planned information session will cover election signage and financial information for candidates. You can register for this session on our website and submit your questions in advance. The recording today will be made available on the city's election webpage as a resource. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.